Okay, Kate, what's your third tip, please?
Oh, my third tip, I need to remember which one I said I was going to... Oh, yes. This is a mantra that I use, and that's low effort, high impact. Now, this is an approach with retrieval practice, but it can apply to other things. So I'll just elaborate. First of all, the low effort doesn't mean no effort. It's not about being lazy, because as teachers, there's so many things we have to put effort into. Reports and feedback and planning and so on. Now, if retrieval practice is going to be sustainable in the sense that teachers are doing it every single day, then it has to be workload friendly. And this is a key message that I share with school leaders. This is something that you're looking for every lesson, then think about the workload implications of that. And that's the low effort for the teacher. But the high impact is on student learning. So whatever you do with the retrieval task, in terms of your planning, delivery, and how feedback is provided, it can be low effort for the teacher. But with every retrieval practice task that we design and deliver, it should have a high impact on student learning. Now, both you and I have done the other way round in the past. So the example that I think of with you, which is high effort from the teacher and a low impact on learning, was your Swiss rolls. Is that right? In math?
Exactly.
And it was exactly the same for me in my career. I remember early on, I was creating sorting cards, and I actually had my three sisters helping me. One was printing, another was cutting, another was putting laminating, putting them in envelopes. Such a high effort task. I put more effort in that actual task design instead of the question design. That's where my effort should have gone. I gave them out in the lesson. The students completed it in about 30 seconds. It wasn't challenging. It was low impact on learning, but high effort for me. So now I've completely flipped that narrative, especially with retrieval practice. And anyone who says that's not possible with retrieval practice, I can show them how. It really is possible.
Oh, well, you've hooked us in there, Kate. So a couple of things to say there. First, you're absolutely right. It's so frustrating as a teacher. You put a load of effort into designing a task and an activity, and then the impact just doesn't match anywhere near the effort that you've put in. So I've certainly tried to go down this path myself and flip it round. So you've done a bit of a hook there, Kate, saying that it's definitely possible. Can you give us some examples of some of these low effort teacher activities that have the high impact on learning?
Yes, so I'm going to talk about multiple choice questions and technology, and that's a great example. There are questions that are already made and available and can be marked online instantly, providing immediate feedback to the teacher and the student. Now, the effort, that low effort, should be the teacher quality assuring the questions and checking them, and then checking and looking at the results. But that is something that is really easy to implement. Retrieval practice with mini whiteboards. The effort should be the teacher thinking about the questions that will be asked. But then, obviously, you had a great chat with Adam Boxer about mini whiteboards, and that's it. It's immediate responses from everyone in the class. The fact that they rub the answer off makes it low stakes. The fact that you can skim and scan with multiple choice questions quickly and easily means you could be responsive. And there isn't that's taken me hours to plan, and that's taken me hours to mark, but it hasn't done that, but it's had a high impact, whether it's check of understanding or retrieval practice. But this is the same for students. I tell them to do retrieval practice, they need a pen and paper, or sometimes they don't even need that if they do it verbally. But pen and paper, write down everything you know from memory, and then they can self-assess it. They can check it again alongside the textbook. And Dylan William has said the best person to mark a test is the person who's just taken a test. So all of these things, the fact that there's question banks out there, the fact that the self-assessment works with retrieval practice, there's templates, all of these are very workload friendly that support the low effort approach. But if the questions are designed effectively, then they should have a high impact on student learning.
That's fascinating, that. I want to ask you something, Kate, that I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. This sounds like a perfect opportunity here. So I love speaking to non-mathematicians because there's something that happens in maths with regard to retrieval practice, and I'm intrigued whether it also happens in history and so on and so forth. And that is, there are certain topics in maths that it's quite hard to design retrieval practice activities and tasks for, because they require like certain equipment. So a good example is constructions. So you've taught students to construct with rulers and compasses, and it's all fine because all lesson they've been using the ruler and the compass and protractor. But then let's say next week you've moved on to another topic, but all of a sudden you want to make sure that you provide an opportunity for them to retrieve how to construct something. Well, then you've got to get out the ruler, get out the compass, get out the protractor, and it's a real hassle. And another example is a lot of the geometry and graphing work we do in maths may require grids to be drawn, axes to be drawn, which have got to be handed out to the kids and so on. So what you often see in maths, and I'm guilty of this, is a lot of the like diagnostic questions used in mathematics, or a lot of the mini whiteboard activities, are for the kind of more easily quizzable elements of maths, the ones that lend themselves more to the students not needing as much kind of equipment with them. So two questions to follow up from that. Is that something that's true in like history, for example? Are there certain aspects of history or certain styles of questions that are that lend themselves better to quizzing in this way? And is there anything we as teachers can do about it? I don't know if you've any thoughts on that.
No, I do have thoughts on that. Well, I would say, and actually this is moving slightly away, but I'll come back to your maths example. The learning process by Arthur Melton is described as encoding, storage, retrieval. Now that's great, that's really helpful. But the problem that I have with that is that it suggests retrieval is the final step in the learning process. We need to add 2 more blocks. We need to add application and transfer. So in my subject of history, they're never going to do a multiple choice quiz on an A-level exam. They're going to write an extended answer. And if I rely too heavily on quizzing and multiple choice, they've got a bank of isolated facts. They need to be able to apply them and transfer them where's necessary. So whilst I'm not in the same, don't need physical resources, we do have to, every subject, we do have to go beyond the quizzing. And I'm a big fan of multiple choice questions and quizzing, but it's limited. It will only take us to a certain point. And I've spoke to other subjects that have had that issue. I spoke to a design and technology teacher, and obviously that there's a lot of equipment there. One of the things that they did in terms of a retrieval was they provided a comic strip, and they said, can you, from memory, write down this process of how you did that, how you did something. So that they were still, instead of repeating that action, they were still getting them to go through the recall of the step-by-step. And I know that is different to the protractor, and I always use you as an example for maths, because I do feel that maths is all subjects are unique, but lots of the retrieval tasks that I have created lend themselves really well to humanities and English and even science, and then maths is different. I'll tell you another way I talk about you a lot in my sessions is I talk about, well, I'll get to this, sorry, there's so much. Multiple choice questions. I read somewhere that you said maths, diagnostic questions, 10 seconds, students should be able to answer them. Don't know if you remember this. And I say, right, Craig Barton's the maths expert, so that's in his subject. I'm not going to disagree with him. And then I show a question from my subject where I say, this needs longer than 10 seconds. And I purposefully show that to say, we've got the maths specialist who knows what works in his subject, and then we've got, even though he's an expert and I learn a lot from him, I then have to think, well, what does it look like in my subject? So there's so much we can learn from each other, and maybe practical subjects like design technology could collaborate with maths in that sense, the same way that I collaborate with English departments. But then we have to, as a community, figure out, subject community, how do we do this? How do we overcome this? Whether that's with retrieval practice or anything teaching and learning based. So I don't know if that
It's
answers
fascinating, this case. It does. It certainly does. It's really interesting. So I'd never thought to do that comic strip idea or the equivalent of kind of, all right, describe how you would construct an angle bisector or describe how you would measure an angle. That's really smart. I can really see that working. Obviously, alongside that, at some point, they've got to have the opportunity to physically do it. But I really, really like that idea. That sounds really good. The follow-up question I had was... often, again, I'm fascinated to know whether this is true in other subjects. One of the key retrieval opportunities that happens in maths, certainly for prior knowledge, is in the do now or in the starter. And you can imagine kids come into a room and on the board, there's 5 questions, or maybe it's the starter grid that you alluded to before, one from last lesson, one from last week, and so on and so forth. Just going back to what you said there about kind of in history, obviously you've got to practice the whole skill of writing the longer form kind of essays and arguments and so on. It's a similar thing in maths where you've got to practice the kind of 5 or 6 mark questions that pull in lots of different areas of mathematics and so on. My fear is often that if retrieval only happens in the do now, you kind of get a skewness towards those. The do now lends itself better to those kind of short, sharp ones, the quick fire retrieve this, 1 mark questions and so on and so forth. And I often worry that if the retrieval kind of gets crammed into the do now and we don't provide those other retrieval opportunities to do things like you say, like do the long form essays, or in my case, answer the multi-mark, more complex exam questions, kids aren't getting an opportunity to kind of finish the journey. As you say, the retrieval isn't the end of the kind of story. It's, okay, retrieve all these individual things, but then put it together to do this more complex problem. So that was just a bit of a long ramble just to say that's sometimes my concern with the do now, that it lends itself better to a certain type of retrieval, if that makes sense.
I think this is a really common problem, that some schools are only doing retrieval practice at the start of a lesson with a do now. And I say to them, this is one of the most effective teaching and learning strategies. Why would you limit it to just 5 minutes? And something that I did with curriculum design was fit in lessons probably once every half term, that a whole lesson was retrieval practice, retrieve and reflect. And I recall doing this with the GCSE group, and they had said to me, Miss, we've finished the content in other subjects and we're revising. When are we going to revise in history? And I was outraged because we had been revising for 2 years. I didn't want to cram retrieval at the end. I spaced it out throughout the curriculum. And that was something that wasn't happening everywhere. But that is sort of very common, that it's 5 minutes at the start of a lesson to 8 minutes. And I understand why. It's a great way to start a lesson. It links in with Rosenshine's daily review. But I have not read research that says it has to be at the start of a lesson. If you were to have a lesson and students need to come in and finish something off, why can't you do your retrieval as a transition? I say to teachers about the phrase Nike, just do it. Like, think more about it like that with retrieval practice. Just make sure you do it. Try not to fixate on it has to be at this point. It has to be 8 to 10 minutes. Sometimes it will be quicker. Sometimes something pops up, a misconception or a mistake, and you think, oh, actually, I need to tackle this right now. So we've got to plan retrieval practice in, and think carefully about curriculum design, because if you are adding in those extra lessons, then obviously you will finish teaching the content later, but it's worth it. It's so worth it. And that class that where we'd been revising for 2 years didn't feel like we were coming to the end and we had to feel like reteaching everything again. It was just, we're at a point where we're just boosting the retrieval strength. So we do need to go beyond a do now. They're great for multiple choice, great for quizzing, but it has its limitations.